Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and constant reader, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by the man who fears the Reaper, despite the song specifically telling him not to. It's Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
I just feel like it's a, protesting too much type situation where, like, if you have to tell me that many times not to fear the Reaper, then there's got to be something to be concerned about there.
No, that's a fair assessment. Yeah. Did you see the thing recently where Will Ferrell said that the cowbell skit ruined Christopher Walken's life?
No.
I didn't actually read the article. I just saw the headline and I was like, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm going to take that headline at utter face value and assume no further nuances behind it.
Absolutely. This week on the show, we are, oh my God, so excited to take a look at the 1994 miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand. This is part of our victory lap for finishing The Stand, where we watched this thing, and we're going to talk all about it for the next hour or so. Matt, I'm really, really excited to do this with you, actually.
Good. Yeah, me too. This will be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into the show proper, though, we do have a couple quick announcements. The first one is I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who reached out and let us know how excited they were about the third season. It was really cool to see everyone's excitement, and really it got us. I think we were already excited, but it got us really excited to get started next year.
For sure.
Not only a few complaints about the books I picked, which was always good to see as well. A lot of people disappointed that I did not pick the book Revival, but sorry.
Yeah, we already answered this in the FAQ.
We did. There were some people that just looked at the announcement and didn't listen to the podcast, and so we got a lot of questions that we already answered in the frequently asked questions section of the show.
That's right. That's why it's important to listen to the entire episode.
All of it, yeah. Especially for the bonus thing at the end.
Exactly.
Matt, we did have another announcement real quick. We have a small, I guess it's kind of a big scheduling change coming up. We originally were slated to cover the first miniseries this week and then come back and do the second miniseries, the 2021 next week. I think we, as we kind of hinted towards last week, we think we bit off a little bit more than we could chew with that one. The idea that we could watch two 6 to 9 hour long miniseries over 2 weeks was not feasible for our current schedules. So we've decided that next week we are just going to take off completely, and we're going to spend that time watching some episodes of The Stand 2020, and then we'll be back a week after that, which I believe is Thanksgiving week, to release our episode covering that miniseries. So that's really it. We just pushed everything back by a week, right?
Yeah, I barely crossed the finish line with this miniseries in a week, and so the next one is longer, so just making it a little bit more realistic for us.
Yeah, we will be releasing an episode of Other Levels of the Tower next week, though, for our patrons. We'll be covering Mr. Harrigan's Phone, the Netflix movie that just came out recently, so we'll be doing that next week. So there will be some content next week, and I think maybe we'll have to look through our archives, Matt, and see if there's another OLOT that we can release to the public from years past. I think there's probably a good one that we can drop that we haven't done that already.
I bet so.
So we'll do something like that. Not a huge deal, but just pushing everything back a little bit. So thank you for your patience with that one, and also thank you for your continuing patience with the Do the King thing. We're working on it, folks. I think.
We're working our way through. There's a lot of them. See, we knew this would happen. Like, we got a ton of submissions, and so that means we have to like the more successful it is, the more work it is. So
yeah, we're gonna have to find a way, I think, one time in the future of speeding up this whole process a little bit. But we're just so busy right now. I think our tentative plan, and I say this now, is that we have the poll up for our patrons to vote on the winner by our season finale episode, which will happen on the 1st of December. So we've given ourselves 4 more weeks there, Matt, to get it done and get the poll up. Not have everything declared and all that done, but at least to just get the poll up on Patreon. I think it's possible.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me.
All right. Okay, so that is all the announcements. So yeah, just make sure you check back in a couple weeks for Stand 2020 and look for a bonus episode next week. And keep being patient about those writing prompt. We're working.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, let's talk all about The Stand 1994. Matt, what is this 6-hour-long miniseries all about?
After a deadly plague kills most of the world's population, the remaining survivors split into two groups, one led by a benevolent elder and the other by a malevolent being, to face each other in a final battle between good and evil.
The Stand, the miniseries, was written by Stephen King himself and directed by Mick Garris. It stars, a lot of people. Gary Sinise, Molly Ringwald, Ruby Dee is in this. Rob Lowe is in this. There's Miguel Ferrer. There's a whole lot of people in this, and some lesser known names. I think I think Jamie Sheridan, who played Flag, like this is basically the only thing I knew him from.
Which is interesting because I feel like I recognize his face, and maybe I'm getting premature with the conversation here, but like when I saw his casting, I was like, that's like weirdly close to how I was picturing Flag the whole time. and like to the extent that I was like, did I have his face in my mind and I was consciously unconsciously using his face, or is this just the best job of casting in the world ever?
Yeah, that's one of the things we definitely have to talk about for sure. I guess the place to start, Matt, is just what are your overall opinions on this thing? You had never seen this miniseries before, of course. So what did you think of it?
I'd never seen it. Well, first of all, it's one of the most like straightforward adaptations I've ever seen of anything ever. Like, and I doubt you'll disagree with me. Like, it's such a transliteration of the book in so many places. You've got whole scenes where the dialogue is either lifted directly or slightly modified for brevity. Relatively few plot changes, a few simplifications here and there. Like, we see Nadine from the beginning instead of the other character.
Yeah, we just read out of the story. Yeah,
exactly. Like, there's a few things like that are done for efficiency, I think, but there's not all that many. I was surprised at how faithful it was to just all these side characters that we have, and honoring their own little stories. And then, okay, so that was the first thing that I noticed about it. It's just like, wow, this is what you imagine as an adaptation when you're a kid. It's like just a straightforward, they made a movie out of it.
Yep.
And then also, I liked it. It's kind of, I think in places goofy, but I think it's like in the way that like everything from the 90s is goofy now.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think that's going to be something for me to talk through with you, because part of me is like, oh, this is corny, and then part of me is like, I bet if I was watching this at age 9 in 1994, I would think this was pretty good TV.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so hard to throw my mind back to that, and make that normal again, right?
Yeah, it actually reminds me, I sent you a clip of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode like a couple weeks ago, and I remember your first comment was like, wow, TV looks really different now than it did back then. Yeah. And The Stand is even older than that, because it was a Buffy episode from the mid 2000s, and it is just like the style of acting on TV and the style of shooting on TV, it is incredibly different than it is today, and that is one of the first things. And I think it's like, you could say that the show looks cheap, and I think it is true that this is clearly a show that did not have a enormous budget, as nothing really had an enormous budget when it was on television back then. But it isn't. It becomes, I think, kind of endearing eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't think it was the cheapness that really particularly bothered me. Like when Flag is doing his demon transformations, I was able to kind of just put myself back into like,
sure,
yeah, this is what stuff looked like on TV back. Or I mean, just in general, like, it's easy to forget how much we kind of put up with. Like, when did Independence Day come out? That was like 96, right?
It was 96 or 97, yeah.
And that movie, like the alien effects kind of look ridiculous when you look at them now, but at the time, I don't remember anybody complaining about it, So I'm just using that as an example of like a movie that came out roughly, within a couple of years of this movie.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of stuff you expect out of TV, like
Yeah,
you just like, I mean, think about Farscape, like, and every Star Trek that has,
totally.
special effects just didn't look good, and it was just part of the suspension of disbelief that you had when you watch television. Like, it's the same thing when you go watch a play, like, people are clearly on a set, and that doesn't bother you when you're sitting in the room watching the play, because that's just part of what it is. And the same thing with television in the 90s. That's just part of what it was.
That's the art form.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did find myself thinking, like, what do people who haven't read The Stand think of this, or what did they think of it?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've looked into that. I also just want to know what you think of this, because I've been talking about my opinions this whole time.
That's all right. You're the new one here, so that's fine. Yeah, I was really struggling to remember the last time I watched this thing, and I think what I've kind of, by process of elimination gotten down to is the last time I watched this thing was in 1994. I really do think that the last time I watched this thing, it was with my family watching it when it came out on television.
Huh.
And that's really fascinating, because it's hard to I guess explain to people that are much younger than us, like how much of a big deal like the TV miniseries was as a event thing in the early 90s. Like, everyone knows about the It miniseries, which I did not watch when it came out because I was 5 years old and much too young. Although I do have a really distinct memory of like me being at my cousin's house and sneaking out past our bedtime to hide behind the couch and watch glimpses of the It miniseries. But then I also hear other people talk about it, and they've given that exact same story. So I'm not 100% sure if that's just something that a lot of people did, or if I've just taken someone else's story and just like subsumed it into my history. I don't know. But by the time this one came out at 9 years old, I think I would have been old enough that this became a family viewing thing. And my mom loves Stephen King, or loved. I'm not sure if she reads him anymore. Both my parents read The Stand, so I think this would have been something that they definitely wanted to watch. And so yeah, that's the last time I watched it. So it had been a while, so it was exciting for me to revisit it. And I'm with you. I like it a lot. I think you're absolutely 100% correct that it's very clear to me that both Stephen King as a writer of the teleplay and Mick Garris as a director, the mission statement here was, we are going to make a accurate adaptation. We are going to hit all the beats, and we're going to do everything we can to make this a true adaptation of The Stand. Some of my favorite parts are like the little small bits that Mick Garris throws in there for us on this. Like, I love that when we first meet Lloyd Henreid in jail, he's beating on the bars with the cot leg. We didn't see the whole part with him, painstakingly unscrewing the cot leg for no reason, but we, the book reader, say, oh, that's the cot leg. And there's a lot of moments like that in this book, or this miniseries rather.
Yeah. There's a ton of details. I totally, it's funny, I can't necessarily pull them to mind at a moment's notice, but yeah, there's so much detail where it's like, things where I would have assumed that they would have done it differently. Let me put it that way. Like, like the who's on bikes versus who's on motorcycles versus who's in a car and who gets picked up when, and just, what Mother Abigail's house is like. And, just so much detail, right? Like, they clearly, not only, did Stephen King write the screenplay, unless he was able to, convey the actual dialogue, but like, somebody had the book in their lap when they were designing, the sets and the details of how things were going to be assembled in the frame.
Yeah, and Mick Garris is such a fan of Stephen King. I mean, he I don't know if you remember this, he also directed the Shining miniseries that we did another Levels of the Tower episode on. He's done a lot of Stephen King stories. And he's such a fan, obviously, and it really shows in how important it is for him to capture the sequences as they were in his head. I will say, and maybe we can get into this more later, one of the things I thought about was exactly what you kind of prefaced this part of the conversation about, is, would this work on people that have not read the book? Because one of the things that I really noticed, and the moment that this crystallized for me was when Larry, tries to say, no, we're not going to leave you behind, Stu, after he breaks his leg.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this because in the moment, if you had just watched the movie, that is, I mean, it's logical in that any good person is going to feel bad about leaving another person behind, but the nuances and the complexity of Larry as a human being and why that specifically is something that would really bother him, the idea of having to leave someone behind, is completely removed from the movie. Like, Larry as a character in this movie, I'm not saying he's a bad character, but like his struggles and his the way he starts the movie and the way he finishes the movie are certainly like he goes through character change, but the intricacies of that and the complexity of it is just kind of completely flattened out of it. And so I just that scene to me worked because I was bringing what I know about Larry from the book into it. But I wonder if all you have is the context of this film in particular, if that stuff works, if it works on you emotionally, if you care enough. And I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, so that's one thing I noticed for sure is this movie decided that Stu is the main character, which is an adaptation choice that makes sense because Stu is the guy who makes it through the whole story. And so if you're going to pick a protagonist, which makes a lot of sense for a TV miniseries, then it might as well be Stu. But what was interesting to kind of to my surprise is I was like, also, it just makes sense for Stu to be the main character because his plot is externalized and everybody else's. So by everybody else's, I really mean Nick and Larry's is very internalized. Like everything we know about Larry's struggles is Larry's inner life, right? I mean, it's not that he doesn't make dramatic decisions in the book. He definitely makes lots of dramatic decisions, but we only really like feel how dramatic these decisions are and how hard they are and the struggle involved and the complexity because we're seeing them from inside him. And when we see him, rebuff Nadine at his house, and like you pointed out, when we see him cry over having to abandon Stu, we don't feel it as that same gut punch that we felt in the novel because it's not able to be constructed in the same way.
I mean, the decision to write Rita out of the story, I think, makes a lot of sense from a practical standpoint of we have to take this 1,100 page book and distill it down into 4 episodes that are 90 minutes long each. Like I get it, but the death of Rita is such an important part to Larry's ongoing arc, and it is really the one part that you could see as an externalization of his arc, right? Yeah. Like the idea of that he failed this woman. He didn't notice. He failed to protect her. He failed to stop her from killing herself, or at least in his mind, he feels that way. And he carries this guilt with him everywhere he goes. And the guilt kind of allows him to change and calcify himself into a new person. That is again challenged at the end by the cruel trick of God going, I'm glad you learned not to leave people behind. Well, here's a curveball for you, buddy. Now you have to. Ha, gotcha. Yeah. That is completely removed from it, and I think it just hurts Larry as a character in this particular adaptation. Which is not to say that I didn't enjoy Larry in this movie. I actually really liked what they did with Larry. I again, the actor who plays him is a man named Adam Stork, who I don't think I had really seen in anything either. And I liked him a lot. I think he's much less, as you said, insular, and like I felt like Larry a lot of times in the middle part of the book is just kind of sad and downtrodden a lot. And this Larry, like I feel like, is always playing music, which is a thing that I don't think Book Larry really did very often. It felt to me like Book Larry saw the performance of music outside of, I think, the one time where he like magically calms Joe with some guitar playing as like part of his old life, and he trying to push away from that. But this Larry like always has a guitar in his hand, is always singing, is always performing, and I liked him a lot. I just think a lot of the complexities of his arc are just kind of flattened here.
Yeah, I agree, especially about the actor. Like the first episode, Larry is actually a delightful kind of scumbag,
Mm-hmm.
scoundrel type. His scenes with his mom I really liked, actually. I
Yeah.
really liked how sleazy he is in his scenes with his mom. um and I guess the problem, which is not his fault, is that like, because we get rid of Rita, we don't really have that organic transformation from sleazebag Larry into morally upstanding Larry. One moment that I did really like, that maybe was sort of serving the same role. We can't really know because we can't put ourselves in the position of not knowing the story. But like, that we sort of cut at one point away from like Larry, and he seems relatively put together, and he's going into the Lincoln Tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
and then the next time we see him, he looks like a Mad Max character, and he's like sitting on a car hood, and he looks totally like I think like his hair is different. He's wearing a
Yeah.
bandana, and he's like singing, and I think it's Joe, and I don't remember one of the other characters, because
Lucy.
it's Lucy, because it's not Nadine now,
Yeah. Yeah.
comes up on him. And it's funny because I didn't even recognize that it was Larry for like 30 seconds until he starts talking. And it was a great moment, because it's like, holy shit, what happened to him?
Yeah.
And so I actually thought that was kind of clever, and I laughed at that, because I was like, they managed to sort of show like Larry has been through some shit, and so you can buy that he has changed a bit. It's just unfortunate that I think, due to fairly understandable constraints, they couldn't really show that.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, besides that fact, which I think extends across all of our characters, we've been talking about Larry here, but I think the same is true with Harold as well. I think, again, I wonder how much Harold would work. This version of Harold, rather, would work on a person who hasn't read the book, because I enjoyed this version of Harold a lot, because I was able to reinforce everything I was seeing with my deeper understanding of who this person is. But there's really not that much of it here in the book, or in the movie rather. It just kind of comes off as he's kind of a little dweeby shit
Yeah.
who gets very jealous of Stu and Franny, and is summoned by the dark side because of that jealousy, and that's really it.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, I didn't think it was bad. I liked
No,
I liked sort of this actor's interpretation of Harold.
it's a very 80s nerd
Mhm.
interpretation, which is not exactly what Harold is described as, but I think it is actually really effective.
Right.
I love the wardrobing they put him in throughout the thing. The black studded leather jacket he wears is absolutely incredible.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's delightful. And then I mean, the funny part is just like what happens in the book, where he starts out, looking like a nerd, and then by the end you realize that like the actor is actually this really handsome man.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Who actually looks really cool, like, and starts pulling off the leather jacket. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, and I think that's Mick Garris trying to do the beat here, where we kind of see that Harold is actually not bad looking and cool, and like could fit in perfectly here if he could just get out of his own way.
yeah.
That's like the most this particular miniseries has time to do that, which I understand, but there is definitely something lost there.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Mick Garris is making adaptations for the people who have read the book.
I mean, honestly, that's what I feel like this is. Like, I feel like this is the stand for people who have read the book, and that's why I think it is definitely a version of the story that people overall have positive things to say about, because if you can add in the details of what you know from the book, it is really just a wonderful watch. Because again, like the attention to detail, as you said, the casting, as you said, like these are all things that the show does absolutely incredibly.
Yeah, we kind of brushed over Gary Sinise and just oh, he's great. Well, like I think he brings a lot of life and nuance to Stu, because he really is a really good actor. And so scenes that would otherwise be maybe kind of straightforward scenes, I think Sinise brings a whole bunch of character and complexity and interest to those scenes. I'm thinking specifically right now of like the time when he's in the hospital at the beginning, and they're kind of screwing him around, doing the tests on him, which,
Yeah.
those were I don't know. Like I guess he made those more engaging than I necessarily had thought of them before, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. I mean, some of my favorite scenes in the movie are stew scenes, and I don't think I would say that about the book at all. I really love the first council scene as well, when he stands up there. I think Gary Sinise does this really great job that I think is actually secretly really challenging, that you have to act like a person who is uncomfortable being in front of people and talking, while also allowing your natural charm to come through, because like that's the goal of the scene, right? He's kind of thrust into this leadership position he's not really ready for, but he's kind of naturally good at it, so he has to be a little awkward and a little nervous and a little shy, while also just being really, really good at this speaking in front of people thing and being a leader thing. And I think he does an absolutely fantastic job of that. Sinise does such a good job.
Yeah, right. Other than just like he brings a lot to the role. I don't know what else to say. He's just it's great. I mean, I think if I read The Stand again, I'm going to be seeing Sinise in my mind. Like I think he brings a lot to it. I will say, so kind of on that note, it's interesting how Molly Ringwald's performance was definitely like really good. It's just like so different from how I saw Franny, interestingly.
This is, I think, the one place that I think the show made some mistakes, and like I almost can't fault them for it, because it's Molly Ringwald. Like, how do you not cast Molly Ringwald if you have the opportunity to? Like, I get it, especially right now when she was cast. Like, she's huge. But yeah, I don't know. I might go a little further than you to say, not only do I not think she fits Franny, I just don't think this movie knows what to do with Franny. And I think a lot of the editing choices that it did took away like everything that I really loved about Franny. Like we've kind of completely excised out the entire plot with her boyfriend, right? And she says she's pregnant she still gets pregnant, has a baby in the series. The show never comes right out and says that this is the baby was some random guy that I was with before, but like timeline wise, it has to be. Right. But the show just doesn't have any time for that at all.
Yeah, I literally was like, wait, did I miss a scene somewhere? But no, they just skip it. It's like, that's not going to go well. This is not going to go over well on 94 TV audiences.
Yeah, and they also made a choice to kill off her mother. Right, yes. Her mother is dead at the beginning of the movie.
Yes, so totally removed all of her like initial character defining moments. Yeah,
and I mean it's okay, because I think one of the things the scene with her that works the best is with her and her father, who was played by what's his name? The guy from Scrubs. I can't remember his name, but
the evil doctor.
Yeah. I'm mad at myself because I looked this up beforehand and now I'm blanking on it. But I think he's great as her father, as Peter Goldsmith, and I think their interaction works really well. Ken Jenkins is his name.
Yeah.
But from there, we just kind of don't know what to do with her. Like, it seems like her relationship with Stu, at least in the framing of the movie, is more about Stu than it is about her. And I think the problems with the book not really have anything her to do in the climax, like, becomes a lot more apparent in a movie where she just disappears from it for the entire last 2.5 hours.
No, I think you're right. And I mean, I don't think her performance was bad, but I will say there were a lot of moments where I felt like somebody should have told her before the camera started rolling, like, okay, this is a really bad situation you're in. This is basically apocalyptic. Your life is in danger. You should be concerned. There should be a degree of anxiety about you, because basically her energy coming into a lot of the scenes is like, oh, hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. And you're like, yep, okay. Like, there's roving men with guns in the landscape. Like, let's have some drama here. Anyway, that's whatever. It's not.
No, I get you. Gosh, I guess we should just like kind of keep hopping through characters. I think this makes sense. The way to do it here.
I'm fine with that, because I still have more comments on this specific thing that I wanted. So like the Mother Abigail actress was like perfect.
Yeah. I mean, that's because that's Ruby Dee, one of the greatest actresses ever.
Yeah,
really, really good.
Like she clearly understood exactly what just embodied that character, right?
Yeah.
And that's a weird character, right? That's an easy character to just not get and fumble, I would say. Like, unless you've, I mean, I don't know. I'm almost like, did she read the book? She must have read the book.
Mm-hmm.
And if she didn't read the book, then that's even more impressive. Because just the nuance and the struggle and pathos involved in that character, and the ability to carry some of the more kind of weird Stephen King-y moments was just amazing to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. She's marvelous. She really is. And you know, a lot of it's actually very difficult for me to talk about this without comparing it to the 2020 version, which I know I specifically cannot do because you haven't watched it yet, and that's a conversation we're going to be having in a couple weeks. But Whoopi Goldberg plays Abigail Fremantle in the 2020 version, and it's not like I dislike Whoopi Goldberg. I like her a lot, but the this is such a better performance, man. This is so much better, and it's kind of weirdly cheesy in some places that I think it's supposed to be. Like, I don't know, the moment at the very end of the story where Joe kind of sees a disembodied Mother Abigail head like floating over the baby that's talking to the infant and like putting all the hopes and dreams of the world into this infant baby. That's kind of goofy. Like, that's a very 90s goofy thing that the show does, but she sold it, I think.
Yeah, sure. I don't care about that stuff. No, she I mean, if anything, it's like her just going all in on some of that stuff is it sells it, and then you're like, yeah, sure, Randall Flagg's a supernatural man from beyond, right? Yes, I'm with you, because when the actor has that conviction, it really helps with that kind of weird stuff.
Man, you're so right, because she has such a tough job in this thing where you know, we're trying to sell this important biblical conflict that's coming on this show that starts in its, you know, first episode very matter-of-factly. You know, this is just a virus got out, people are dying, and then we need to shift it to this weirdness, and we need someone to carry that load. And we need someone, when they start talking about God, when they start talking about the devil, when they start talking about what we're supposed to do, and this is what God wants you. We need someone to sell that for us, and we need to believe it. We need them to be fully invested in it. We need the actor to be fully invested into this character, and we need to hear them say things like when Nick says to her, I don't believe in God, and she responds, it doesn't matter, he believes in you. Again, a direct quote from the book. We need that to be taken, and we need that to impact us. And I think Ruby Dee does a really, really good job of selling every single one of those moments where you're right. Like, maybe you step back from this thing and you go, this is all kind of silly and goofy, isn't it? But it works.
Yeah, I was actually also thinking of that exact moment, because it's very easy to convey something wrong, something other than what Mother Abigail, the character, would come off as in this situation. But it really is just like, she just finds it hilarious, and that's it. Like, she's not laughing at Nick.
Yeah,
she's not being snarky.
Yeah.
It's just like, who cares that you don't believe in God? That's irrelevant. Yeah.
God bless you, Nick, but it don't matter.
Yeah.
The way it's a laughy, but it's never like mean laughter.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, oh, you sweet summer child type laughter. Like, she's not meant to be mean or rip him down, but it's just like, you're so adorable. Like, you don't understand. You don't understand. Yeah, it's really great. She's wonderful.
Yeah, she's one of my favorite things, honestly.
Yeah. I think the other. So I want to talk to you about Nadine a little bit here. First of all, I think Laura San Giacomo, I think is her name. I will always remember her as the girl from Just Shoot Me, the 30-minute sitcom I watched a lot of episodes of in the 90s. I like her Nadine. I do. Obviously, like with Larry, and like we talked about, like with Harold, a lot of the interiority of Nadine is a little bit lost on us. but I think like she does a really good job of showing us this incredibly conflicted person that is at the same time drawn to this dark man and also terrified of him. I like that Mick Garris went with the effect of kind of having her hair slowly and in some ways subtly gray over the course of the movie, instead of just like having it start with like one like bright strip of white like the book describes, and then it changes from there. I liked that effect a lot, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. I liked her portrayal of Nadine. I think I retained some of the same problems that I had originally with the character, where, you know, like there's even a moment in the miniseries where Flag is like, "You were promised to me," and she's like, "Who promised? Who made the promise?" or something like that.
Yeah.
And the show never answers it, and the book never answered it either. And I was, I guess I kind of felt like that's a question where I'm like, well, I don't get it. I still don't get it. And so it's not even a criticism of the miniseries. It's just like me continuing to be like, well, this didn't add any clarity for me either.
I totally get that, but I love that as just a a good way to show Flag's in over his headness a little bit here. Like he is not the master here. He barely even knows what's going on. And like in the book, we get to spend a lot of time in Flag's head and kind of see the ways in which he's slowly realizing how things are spinning out of his control. But I think that to me is one way of demonstrating that in this movie.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So not to jump away from Nadine too quickly, but like Flag, it's not exactly the way I imagined Flag, because, you know, I think the Flag I imagined was a lot darker and more like satanic. But I do like the way that he did Flag. It's interesting. It's kind of like shittier and schlubbier and like more. What I'm trying to say is the way that he plays Flag for the whole movie is kind of closer to the way that I felt like Flag was being portrayed toward the end of the book. But I think it works, actually. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean at all?
I do. He kind of plays him as a salesman, sort of, and I actually didn't like it at first. I think I'm trying to remember when the actual first scene with Flag is. I think we see him walking on the road, and then he does his hovering thing, right, briefly, and then the first scene where we get to talk to him is the Lloyd scene, and I didn't like him in the Lloyd scene. But I also found as the movie continued on, I started liking him more and more. Maybe it is literally just because of what you're talking about here, that this performance fits the kind of frantic, losing it version of Flag that we see at the end of the book. And so as we got closer to that moment, his performance felt more and more right to me.
Yeah,
I ended up really liking it.
You know, so what there is in the performance is there's a lot of like hollowness. There's a lot of fakeness, which I think is a quality of Flag's.
Yeah.
And I guess it's more like, this isn't me having a problem with it. This is just what I was thinking about. I was thinking, like, how would I play Flag? Not that I'm an actor, but sometimes it's fun to think about it. And it's like a big component of Flag is this grin, right? And when I imagine the grin, or when I imagine doing the Flag grin, it's a inhuman, like almost like borderline, like bordering on like being a rictus, not a grin that any human would ever really make when they were happy. Like, you couldn't mistake it for like a grin of happiness. It's like it's like a horrible clown grin. And the way this actor chose to do it, it was basically just kind of like an empty, like, yeah, we're all pals here, kind of like you said, salesman grin. And I'm like, you know, honestly, this probably works better than what I was imagining. Or maybe what I was imagining, it works in a book where you can kind of wave your hands and have a fantastic sheen over everything, but that wouldn't necessarily translate to the screen very well. And so I think his choice probably is not a bad choice for the screen.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I liked the grin a lot. I think that the biggest problems I have with the flag are not even necessarily the performance. It's the choices we made with the demon face stuff. And again, it is not the special effect that bothers me there. I just didn't feel like we needed to do it in the places that we did it. Like I felt like it fit very much in the Nadine rape scene.
Mm-hmm.
Because like that is the horror of what is revealed there. But like when he just like turns into the demon in front of Lloyd, I'm just like, why we do this? It's just like he gets so mad that he just turns into like I didn't think that was necessary. I didn't think that added anything to the character at all.
Yeah.
And like stuff like other stuff where in the book, the one really goofy moment that didn't work at all for me in this thing was when the judge is killed. When the judge is accidentally killed and Flag appears to punish the guy who killed the judge, and it's like it's a really like unintentionally hilarious scene where like suddenly Flag's there and he's like surrounded by, it's like someone was like standing just off camera and just like threw some crow feathers up into the air as he rushed forward, and it's like, look, he was the crow and now he's Flag. Like some of the stuff that I think the book leaves like kind of vague about like Flag's ability to, you know, be in multiple places and move around, and obviously like we know he's the crows, but like you don't actually see him like transform from crow form to human form and back. It just felt a little goofy to me when you actually see it on screen.
Yeah, that's some of the most goofy stuff. I agree. In fact, the him turning into a demon and then trashing the room was the goofiest scene in the movie. In part for me, I mean, almost to the degree where I was doing the thing where I'm like, well, this is making him seem really pathetic and ineffectual, because this is the temper tantrum of the great demon, you know, supernatural being Flag, is that he like kicks over like a vase and like breaks a TV and like throws something. And this is like supposed to express his towering rage, and all he's doing is he's like breaking a few cheap glass objects in a room, which comes off as it's unintentionally funny. But then as I kind of allowed myself to think about it, I was like, well, maybe the point here is how pathetic he is.
Yeah,
that was go ahead.
I think that is, yes, but
yeah,
I don't know.
Well, one interesting change that I was a bit surprised by was they had Nadine just straightforwardly throw herself off the balcony instead of having Flag do it. And I wasn't sure if I think that was maybe like the one change where I was like, why'd we do that? Like I kind of liked it the other way.
I think it makes sense from an agency perspective that you give Nadine a little bit more agency in that like she chose the way to go out. But I guess like from a practical standpoint, how to translate the way the scene happens in the book into a film is really difficult, because like, I mean, I guess you could do like a shot where as she's thrown, she gets a smile on her face or something. Like, I guess you could do that, but I just don't know how it would translate of like, oh, she like manipulated you into getting so pissed off you threw her off the edge, thus freeing her. Like, that's a little bit more difficult to do. It is a lot more simpler to just have her like stand up and do it herself and show that like she's taking back her agency and removing herself from the equation.
Yeah,
I agree with you, Lou. It's much better in the book, I think.
That's fair. I mean, it's interesting because like it's funny. Like I can imagine how you would shoot the book scene if you had, you know, the budget and you could do like what I'm going to vaguely call modern camera angles. But if they seem pretty beholden to like the way that they shoot things, probably for practical reasons.
Yeah.
And then in that case, it did. I guess it did make sense to do it this way. Yeah.
Yeah. I there are some other Flag changes that I don't know if I loved particularly. I did not like the choice to have Flag appear in front of Harold instead of hitting an oil slick and go flying. I think that takes something which I think is deliciously vague in the book and makes it definitive. You know, like this idea of like, did Flag put that there? Is like, or what? Like, I think that takes a little bit away of Harold's realization post accident. If we just have him see Flag and that causes him to wipe out. I understand why you did it. It's simpler. It's easier to explain, but I don't know. It just it took a little something away from it for me.
Yeah, I mean, and also there's not. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's not the moment where Harold shoots at Nadine either, right? So
no, yeah, that's gone too.
There's just a lot of complexity surrounding Harold. That's just kind of like we can't really do. I get it. Like especially with Harold, because the idea of Harold being like at all an interesting or sympathetic character is like 100% internal to Harold's head.
Yeah.
And is never externalized ever in the book. So I don't blame them for just being like, God, there's no way to do this.
Yeah, we can't really do this.
He's just a straightforward antagonist.
We will revisit this conversation when we watch the 2020 version, because although I do not like that, one thing I think they did a very good job at is Harold. So we'll see what you think when we get there.
Okay. Yeah.
I also didn't like the appearance of this is a really stupid Scott nitpicky thing. I did not like the appearance of the Crow in front of the Project Blue army base. Although like it is clear to me that Flag like is not involved at all with the release of the super flu, like just it being there. Like I get it from like a visual perspective, but like I love the version of Flag that had no idea this was happening and just is like, ooh, opportunity. It's my time now. Cool. I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah.
And so any kind of linking of the event itself with Flag, I'm going to push against.
Yeah, sure. That's yet another moment where you just know for a fact that anybody who wasn't familiar with the book would just be like, "Why is the crow?
Weird crow there."
I guess crows are bad because they're a harbinger of death.
Yes, omens. Yeah.
But if you're a book reader, you're like, Flag. It's Flag.
Yeah.
Before I forget, Ed Harris is in this movie.
Ed Harris is in this movie very briefly.
Yeah.
He gets really sad and shoots himself.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, it's a more sympathetic portrayal of Mr. Piece of Shit Army Guy than I expected.
It is. I mean, I guess that's maybe a good overall question. We can use this character as kind of a way of doing it. Is this a more sympathetic version of America than the book paints?
Maybe a little bit. I still think that the book is not saying that America sucks.
No, I agree with you.
But no, I mean, maybe like okay, to answer your question, definitely yes, this is more sympathetic because we don't spend like a huge amount of this show showing American soldiers massacring huge numbers of innocent civilians. And it's kind of in there, but it's very brief. Like basically all we get is them killing some journalists, which is definitely bad, and then I guess there's a relatively short sequence. I've only seen this once, and it was like 3 days ago, so my memory's not the sharpest. But like relatively short sequence of them of like the military like trying to corral people or something.
Yeah, I mean they definitely murder some journalists for sure.
Yeah, so it's nothing like the many pages of like horrible atrocities and massacre of protester type situations that we saw in the book.
Yeah, I mean we have the poem by Yeats make its appearance in this again. Mick Garris' attention to detail here. He has not only does he have the general quote Yeats, but he has him pronounce it wrong, which is great because it just goes completely unaddressed in the thing. Like no one says anything about it to where if you're a random viewer who doesn't know like anything, you could just walk away from this movie saying, "Oh, you pronounces it's Yeats."
They screwed it, or just they screwed it up in the movie.
They just made a mistake in the movie. But yeah, I mean, like I think I feel like in the book, like his recitation of that poem was like him, like the center cannot hold, the center has to hold. We have to do whatever it takes, and like in this, it's a much more defeatist kind of mourning of the loss of civilization than it is the government losing its control over the people.
And if I'm not mistaken, he reads different parts of the poem. In the book, he only reads the first part with the sinner cannot hold, like you just said, and then talking about how, well, we have to. But in the movie, in the show, I don't think he reads the whole poem, but he does say the line that I kept referring to, which occurs repeatedly throughout the text, which is, in what rough beast its hour come round at last, slashes toward Bethlehem to be born. He says that,
Yep.
which the character in the book did not say. So, which I found delightful, because clearly Stephen King, did it on purpose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
much more sympathetic, but still, I mean, I think still American government sucks. Like, I think the one thing that this is missing is that this long chapter long montage of all the terrible things the United States government is doing. Like, we get to see one brief scene of it, and like the way the book gets to live in it for several pages really just makes you hate the government, right? Like, it's really effective at that, especially the moment when we're like, oh, we need to release this overseas too, lest they think it was us that did it, is really the straw, the final straw in the book. But none of that's
everyone
here. We're talking about this though, the Don't Fear the Reaper opening montage, I actually thought was really good. I like perhaps one of the most obvious songs you can go with. The only other one more obvious you can go with is Sympathy for the Devil, which they do not actually use in this movie, but we do have Randall Flagg make a direct reference to it.
Yeah, that's great. Can't you guess my name?
What? Which is a perfect Lloyd moment. We'll talk about him in a sec. But I think that montage is very effective. And there's another montage, I think, in the third chapter, of, just showing like animal, like there's the teddy bear washing up on the shore and like the emptiness of the world at the end of the plague. I think it's in part 2. Some really effective musical montages throughout this thing. I think I really enjoyed them.
Yeah. The funny thing to me about the Don't Fear the Reaper montage is that it is perfectly timed to last the entire duration of the song, which is not how you normally do those in movies. You normally kind of fade out.
This is okay. I'm gonna quibble with you here, not with you, but with the movie here though. This is a thing that has always bothered me about The Stand in general, but I think becomes only super really obvious when you see it in visual form. It doesn't make sense to me that all these people would be out doing shit like constantly throughout The Stand, especially in this miniseries. We run across corpses in the middle of like doing stuff, like this lady's making a milkshake and this person's sitting on his tractor doing some plowing. And I'm like, y'all died of the flu.
Yeah, it wasn't a neutron bomb that killed you where you stood. It was you were sick for a while, and then you died after being really, really sick. So, no, you're right. It's a valid. I mean, you know why they do it, though, is the thing.
Yeah, it's the effect of it, for sure. And I mean, this is, to be completely fair, this is a problem in the book technically as well, right? That technically in the book, there are tons of, like, we even got to that part where like we need the turning off society because everyone was like mid, toasting on their toaster when they died. And I was like, that's not, I actually love the way the movie lampshades this briefly though, because there's that opening Don't Fear the Reaper sequence, where everyone's like busy at work in the government compound and like eating and go caring about their day, and they're all just like slumped over and dead right where they were. And in the movie it says like, oh well, this was the purest strain of the virus, so it killed everyone like really fast, and as it spreads it's going to mutate and therefore it will slow down a little bit or something. They kind of hand wave it away real quick. But I mean, it's obviously a choice that was made for the effect while also kind of being completely unrealistic to where how a person would behave if they have the flu.
Yeah, that was something I noticed while reading the book, but just brushed off because I didn't care. I don't
actually care either, and I think it's just it rears its head a little bit more clearly when it's all visual instead of just you're reading along with it. Like it's they cut to people or corpses in doing things or in positions where you're just like, if you had the flu and had 104-degree temperature and were like your lungs were drowning in fluid, you would not be doing that right now.
Yeah, it was more like this. It's funny because now that I'm about to say it, I'm less confident. But I think it's in the Andromeda strain where the disease, or it's like a virus from like space, basically, and like it works like so unbelievably fast that you actually just like drop dead as soon as the like molecule touches your skin. Is this the Andromeda strain? Am I referencing the right thing?
Possibly. It's been so long since I've read that.
It seems right to me. But anyway, the point is like that's its own kind of horror, which is actually very distinct in my mind from like you catch a very severe slow acting flu that you then like suffer horribly from, knowing that you're going to die. So like, you know, like you said, as the camera is panning through the facility, we see people who have just like died on their sandwich that they were having, you know, like in that moment, right? Which that's also a scary thought, the idea that there's some pathogen that's just so deadly that you just keel over, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, the interesting that the show actually, you know, threw in a little one-liner to explain it.
Yeah. Okay, Matt, let's talk about Lloyd.
Okay.
Miguel Ferrer is probably one of the most well-known actors on the show, right? Maybe besides Rob Lowe and Gary Sinise. Although I don't know if 94 Rob Lowe was like super well-known yet. It's very early in his career. But what did you think of Miguel Ferrer's Lloyd?
One of the most changed from the book, I have to say. I mean, he doesn't have the ostentatiously dumb attributes of early book Lloyd, and he doesn't have the sympathetic side of later book Lloyd. It's a very sort of like stolid, reserved performance, which doesn't give you a lot to go on. These are all nice ways of saying that I didn't particularly care for it.
I'm so torn on this, man. Like, first of all, he just seems way older than Lloyd was in my head, and I don't know if that's just me misremembering, like exactly how old Lloyd is. I think I looked this up because I was curious, and one wiki just had like says his age is not specified. The single passing reference to it does describe him as young, and maybe I'm just kind of infantilizing him because of his general dumbness, but Miguel Ferrer is obviously much older. I think he was in his 40s when he was in this role, so he looked like more straight-laced and formal and tight and older than I ever imagined Lloyd.
I think it's important to the idea of Lloyd as a character that he is this young loser who didn't know what he was doing and was totally out of his depth in life, who was then basically put in charge of a city. And then because he's sort of been leveled up by Flag, he actually rises to that task, surprisingly. Whereas this version of the character, he kind of seems like a worldly, maybe kind of mobbed up guy with like a long criminal background. Of course, none of this is textual in the show, but you feel like, oh, this guy must be like a really experienced criminal to gives off that hard edge, right? I don't see Lloyd in the book as having a hard edge. He is in over his head by definition. That is the character.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the most damning thing I can say about the performance is that when oh my God, why can't I remember names of this book we just spent 7,000? When Glenn says to him, "It's okay, Mr. Henry, you didn't know any better." Like, that line doesn't work on me with this version of Lloyd. I feel like this version of Lloyd did know better. I feel like this version of Lloyd, was, he just comes off as like he seems like the sleazy professional businessman, like in charge guy. Like that's how, and part of that is Miguel Ferrer, and he's done that in many roles in the past. I don't know. Like we really get one sequence with him where he's with where he's with a Poke, and like that version of Lloyd, just I don't know, it's
Disappears
just
completely.
weird. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not. It's weird. It's downright weird because you don't ever see that kind of. Because he starts dressing totally differently when he's in Vegas, and you just forget that he ever was that guy. Like even on a wardrobe level, you want to kind of make Lloyd look like he doesn't quite know how to dress himself. I think.
Yeah, I would love like to see that dress, but in a way that it doesn't look like he's wearing it either correctly or comfortably, or it feels weird on him. He just looks good in it. He just looks sharp in a black suit with a red tie, like he looks sharp and menacing and everything, like, and in control. And yeah, it's kind of disappointing. But at the same time, he had some scenes that I really loved. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think I mean, he can have scenes that you really love, but and yet be miscast and not really having the I was going to say the right interpretation of the character. And it's like, well, basically every other character is hewing so close to the way they're portrayed on the page that when one of them really stands out as going in a different direction, I just kind of almost automatically am like, well, he's doing it wrong. Everybody else is doing it right. And, maybe even King decided like he wanted to go a different way with Lloyd and did it on purpose.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
Who do you want to go to next? So many characters. There's so many.
Glenn.
How about first? Let's talk about Ratman.
Ratman, the much more important character now,
who literally appears in like the last few pages of the book as it's like, oh yeah, this is Ratman, and now Mick Garris says, no, we need to show him at the very beginning. We're gonna meet Ratman in New York City. And we're going to see him again. Just a fun touch there. Also, by the way, a fun touch that the monster caller, the monster yeller, is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which I didn't know. The guy at the beginning who's like warning, like I was like
9 feet tall. Yeah.
How did you like? Hey, Kareem, want to come do the stand real quick? Sure.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Is it really like that's funny because
it is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Yes.
That's just funny because I didn't recognize him, even though I absolutely know who that is. Yeah, no, and yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just reeling from the knowledge that's Kareem. Yeah, the Ratman thing is very funny. It's just classic. It's just like, okay, we're making this for TV, so we want to have like henchmen characters who are persistent instead of just having like a faceless mob that appears at the end. We want to have a couple guys who we recognize.
Sure.
That's really all it is.
But it's still interesting the way the other guy kind of just shows up, though. What's his name? I can't remember names. Whitney, who's played by Sam Anderson, who's an actor I know quite a bit, actually. He's been in a ton of things. But he just kind of shows up at the end, just like he did in the book, where suddenly there's a guy named Whitney, and suddenly he's going to stand up to Flag and get electrocuted for it.
Yeah. By the way, I wanted to just briefly reference our conversation about America here, because one moment that is absolutely preserved between book and show is him saying, "This isn't how Americans act," which I see as, and it's part of this final culminating moment of standing up to Flag. And what does he say when he stands up to Flag? He says, "This isn't how Americans act." And it's like, it's a great piece of writing because it's a statement of faith, because evidently this is how Americans act. But he's saying, no, we're better than this.
We should be better than
we should be better than this. And then, and then the scene culminates, and that's how it ends, right? With this statement of faith in what it is to be an American being one of the last, moments punctuating that. So I just thought it was worth pointing out that moment, that line made it into the actual miniseries.
Yeah, I mean, did you think it had as impactful an effect in this story, though, in this version of the story? Because I feel like we dealt with society building and America, and it's America that did this, but it's also Americans that are going to have to rebuild. Like, I don't know. to me, it was one of those things that worked because I knew the depth of the context behind it.
Oh, it absolutely jumped out to me because I was paying attention for that kind of thing, but I don't think it would have even been noticed by a person who wasn't conversant with the book, honestly.
Gotcha. Okay. I also really like, for some reason, Mick Garris says, and then Julie is going to trip over the electrified corpse of Whitney, and then she'll get electrified too. It's just like, we needed to specifically show her dying or something.
Fuck her specifically before we nuke everyone. No.
Yeah.
It's great.
I gotta say though, and I think this gets us really neatly into our next conversation, which I think needs to circle around both Nick and Tom.
Mm-hmm.
I still felt like even watching this sequence, I still felt kind of bad for Julie a little bit. And I know this is like the why are you choosing to die on this hill, Scott? But like, I don't know. I just watched the sequence with her and I think she's awful still.
Uh-huh.
I just still felt a little sad by it. Like the moment where she's like just begs them that to go with them. She just begs them. She's like, please, I'm sorry. It was just a joke. I'm sorry. Can I please go with you? And he slaps her and it's just like, we don't need you. I can't help but read that even in this adaptation as, oh man, that makes me sad. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, it's the kind of thing where I do want to, find somebody who's never read The Stand, but who watched that scene and say, what does this make you feel about this character? Because I feel it comes off as ambiguous, both in the book and in the show, where you're basically like, was it the right choice? Like, yeah, she's being real mean. Like she's acting really badly, but until she starts shooting at them, you're like, I don't know that she deserves to be like abandoned. But then again, if she's going to behave this way, then you can't exactly just bring her along. So it leaves you with a feeling of conflict, and maybe that's what King wanted you to feel, a feeling of like, what would you do in this situation where it's a desperate life or death struggle, and then you find like the third person that you've seen since the disaster, and they're a massive tool. Do you abandon them because you're like, well, you're one of the only survivors, but I can't trust you. And like, I think like we talked about before, like she's clearly broken, and that makes you pity her even though she sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the fascination I have with it is like, that I kind of convinced myself that my read on this whole thing was just wrong, because I do think it is rather confusing when, you go directly from that sequence in the book that made me feel so sad to her hopping up into a sniper's nest and taking pot shots at our heroes. Like, obviously that is not a good thing. And I think you in the moment said you felt kind of vindicated in your dislike of her and that. And I think that's what the book wants you to feel. So I feel really conflicted and I'm uncertain about this. And then I see an adaptation of it, and the adaptation to me paints a very similar picture where it portrays that moment as like, Nick, that's a little harsh. I mean, she was a dick to Tom. I get it. Like, and she's calling him a bad word. I get it. I get why it's not nice. I get why it's mean, but gosh, you just slap her and then like, as she's begging you, please don't leave me, you just say, we don't need you. Yeah. And the way Mick Garris shoots that sequence, I think you're supposed to feel kind of sad for her there. So I remain conflicted about this whole thing.
The slapping actually came off as more abrupt and undeserved in the show than I remember feeling about it in the book. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's been a few months now, but I feel like she was like actively antagonizing Tom, like actively, and like trying and scaring him. And I feel like in the show, the way we saw it is she was just kind of laughing and enjoying his fear a little bit, where it felt like, oh geez. Ugh.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, yeah, because the text is able to say like, he could see in her eyes that that there was nothing there but pure malice and a desire to harm, whereas in a performance it's just like she just seems kind of spacey and not realizing that she's actually causing a huge problem by behaving this way.
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about those two, though.
Okay.
I guess we'll start with Nick. What
Okay.
what'd you think of Nick in this adaptation?
I liked it. Nick is tricky for all sorts of reasons, obviously. But I thought that Rob Lowe's face was really enough to convey a lot of the pathos there. Like I don't know what I would have asked to do differently with Nick. I'll put it that way. And I still feel like Nick's arc becomes truncated prematurely. That is my hill that I'm going to die on. So
yeah, well, I mean that's kind of like that's definitely, if you're following the book, you have to do that.
Right.
Kind of, yeah.
Which is not his fault. It's just like it leaves you with the feeling of like, well, that's all we're gonna get. So, yeah, I liked it. What did you feel about Nick?
I like Rob Lowe a lot. I think he perfectly captures kind of the gentle sadness of Nick through a lot of the book, and then the gentle happiness. I do. This is maybe a stupid question, but deaf and dumb, deaf and mute. There's a scene where Nick screams, and I could have maybe again. I thought outside of your inability to speak because you're deaf, and part of learning how to speak is hearing people speak. Like when you call someone mute, I thought they literally were not able to like make sounds. Is that just not the case at all? Can a mute person still like just scream?
I don't know. I'm sure there's a technical definition, like official, but I don't know. I mean, it could just be because in the book it specifically says that he has a physical reason why he can't speak.
Yeah.
Because some deaf people can learn how to speak.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, but speaking and making any sort of vocalization are two different things. And also, I think the moment when he screams is like, it makes sense that there would be a dramatic punctuation for that. So
no, I get, I definitely get it dramatically. It popped out. It popped out to me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I like the performance. I agree with you that like there's like Nick is such a nice guy and a wonderful person in this story. I do really kind of wish there was more for him to do in it. The one thing I will say is the camaraderie between him and Tom, I really, really felt in this. I absolutely did. I liked their scenes together a lot. I liked the Rob Lowe gentle sadness of having to send Tom to do this. Even the scenes where he comes back as Ghost Nick to kind of help Tom. I really liked all that. So I think Rob Lowe did a really good job here.
Yeah, one issue which I'm not really blaming the adaptation. It just strikes me as the kind of natural consequence of doing this in a TV form is like the book makes the point that despite the fact that he can't speak, people will defer to him, and like people will like often like pause and look to him to see if he's going to write anything before the conversation moves on because he's just so respected. That wasn't something that really came across to me in this adaptation, and I think it's just because it's like that just works better on the page. It slows everything down if you actually do that kind of thing on film.
I agree with you, and I think like it's really interesting too because like it also affects blocking of how you construct your scenes, because like you have to have whoever's talking. If you want Nick to be active in the scene, responding to thing, like you have to block the scene to where Nick can read all the lips, which is not something you ever have to think about or worry about in text. You just like Nick sees it. They're done. That's all you have to write. Nick sees Stu's mouth move. Hooray, we've done it. But yeah, like every scene has to block it, and I was really paying attention to this time because I was just curious about it. But it's like seeing the ways in which like they have to situate when it's a group of four of them talking, and they always have to be in a circle, and like you'll see Nick like look off into the distance sometimes, and then like it's almost as if you see Rob Lowe remember it's like, oh shit, I'm not supposed to be able to hear what this guy's saying, and he'll like frantically look back. and look back. Like I don't know, it's one of those translation things where it's just not something you need to think about in a novel at all.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So again, not holding it against the adaptation. It's just definitely something that I kept noticing of just like, I guess part of it is just like, man, it would really suck to be in this position.
Mm-hmm. So Tom, let's talk about Tom. Tom Cullen is played by I can't pronounce his last name. But he is the one guy from the TV series Coach. Did you ever watch Coach?
No.
Man. He was Coach's friend in Coach. He's huge. He's 6'6".
Yeah.
He's a big guy. And this is, I think he was a football player. And this is something I actually think that I as I guess problematic as we want to call it, I really enjoyed his version of Tom. I really did. I liked it a whole lot. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it was super lovable.
Mm-hmm.
And also, interestingly, I feel like in terms of screen time, Tom, if anything, gets more of a share in the adaptation, than he got in the book. Like, we seem to keep almost all of the Tom scenes, even
Mm-hmm.
when we might get rid of other minor characters scenes. And it really emphasizes to me how important Tom is to the story, because we meet him very early in Nick's story,
Yeah.
and then he continues to be a central character all the way through the end because he saves Stu. And I think luckily the actor is like really really charming and just makes Tom utterly lovable, and I think it works really well. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sequence that I don't think is in the book at all that I was really interested in, because I forget even the context of it. I just wrote down I really love the scene and how much this affected me, though. But there's a scene where he says, "Man, I hate being." I'm not going to say it R word.
Yeah.
He's referencing this general frustration with himself and his disability, and I found that really affecting. And that is something that is not in the book. That they wanted to take the time to show that this is a character that is aware of his disability, and is like, I think Tom in the book was often frustrated by it, but like the sadness that it creates, and this is by the way why it's become kind of not acceptable to use that word that I'm not saying here, and why I personally don't use it is because people know what that word means. All people know what that word means, and they internalize it, and it hurts them, and this is, people casually throw this word at Tom constantly, and maybe assuming that he doesn't really understand what it means. And he knows. We see that right here, and we see the frustrations he has with it. And I felt like that was a glimpse into a character that the book, definitely pointed at, but to take the time to do it in this movie, I was really kind of happy that we did that a lot.
Yeah. I mean, the show seems to actually take the character of Tom seriously, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a bit part. It's not a, I just kind of reject the idea that Tom, as portrayed in this show, is problematic, because it's like, if this is problematic, then are you notional person saying we just shouldn't have characters like this in fiction? Because this is about as good as you can do it, I think. Yeah.
I guess problematic in just the general way of like, neurotypical person am going to put on an affect of what I think a disabled person would sound and act like, is, I guess, not like inherently problematic, but just a little bit. I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to argue with you here, because I generally agree with you, but I can see why someone would watch this today and be like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, I guess. I like, he's so unambiguously like the hero,
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think a good comparison here is Duddits in the Dreamcatcher, who I think that's who does that? That's
it's that one guy. I will say that I find this portrayal of Tom to be much more respectful and grounded than that portrayal.
Donnie Wahlberg. There we go.
Donnie Wahlberg,
I 100% agree with you. Like as compared to what Donnie Wahlberg does with Duddits almost a decade later. 100% better for sure.
Yeah.
I do think it's a little interesting that, like, you know, Tom in the book is not described as a large person at all. And this adaptation chooses to cast someone who's 6'6" and a former football player. I again, no spoilers, but the 2020 adaptation casts a rather large man as well. I wonder if there's kind of something to this internalized societal idea of like mentally disabled people being like these kind of gentle giant type stereotypes, I guess, because it seems like we did this twice, despite the fact that I believe he's described as normal height, normal build in the book itself.
No, I think you're totally right. That totally is a thing that is ingrained in the subconscious expectations and shorthand of the trope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But no, I loved him. I think he's great, and you're absolutely right. That this does make it clear that Tom is such a pivotal role in all this. And I liked again the Mick Garris attention to detail. You know, when we go to Tom's house, we see the outside of Tom's house, and it's decorated and festooned with like all this wonderful stuff, and we don't have to like take time. We just like show this wide shot of it. And it's like, look how Tom decorated his house. Isn't this great?
Right, which ties into the earlier moment when Nick first finds him, and he's got all the mannequins in the street.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Which is delightful and also sad, right? Because it's like, again, like this is a man who was incredibly lonely and he had no one and was doing whatever he could to entertain himself, but also to feel less lonely. I love Tom. Yeah. I am so endlessly glad that Stephen King let Tom live, that he allows him to make it through this story alive, because he's so wonderful.
Yeah, I agree. I love it.
Who else do we have?
Glenn is one I wanted to cover, just very simply to say that I loved it. It was physically, he didn't look like the way I was physically imagining Glenn, but like personality wise, it was perfect. Like it was one of those. There's a lot of that in this adaptation, honestly, where I was like, wow, they just nailed that. But like he was one of the ones that was the most nailed.
I agree. I think I like it's weird. I think I do this automatically unless a story like every sentence reminds me of a character's age, but I think I just naturally age them down. So like when we first met Glenn, I was like, wow, he's old. And I was like, oh, he's supposed to be old. Like, he's like the oldest out of all of them.
Right.
So that's my own personal thing.
Yeah, it's I agree that I always inescapably saw him as older and like more robust. And because like there's guys who are 65 who are
Tom Cruise,
you know, and like I know 65-year-old guys who I'm not confident that I could defeat in a physical altercation. So like I mean, how old is, I forget. Is I don't even, it doesn't matter. The point is,
how old is Glenn supposed to be? I think he's in his mid-60s. Yeah,
but like the point of Glenn is actually like he's not just old. He's like arthritic and he's like having kind of a hard time. But he goes through this ordeal anyway. You know, despite the fact that he's not necessarily in the best of health.
Oh, actually, it says he's 56, 57. Actually, that guy looks way older than 57.
The actor or the character?
The actor. It says the character is 57.
Yeah, you know, back in the 90s, you know.
Here's a point of comparison for you. Greg Kinnear plays him in the 2020 version.
Okay.
You know who Greg Kinnear is, right?
Not off the top of my head. Sorry, let me look it up. He's not old.
I mean, he kind of I think he's 60 this year.
That's the funny thing is now like 60-year-olds look like 40-year-olds used to look in the 1980s and 90s. So
This is true. I think it's the hair. Honestly, it's the hair. Like this is when you realize that the cast of Friends is older today than the cast of Golden Girls were during that show. Like it's all they had old lady hair, and all the cast of Friends has not old lady hair. Hair does a lot, I think.
That's ridiculous. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
But no, I love his version of Glenn. I love every one of his scenes, like when he starts, waxing poetically about society and about white magic and all these things. Like I think it just works. Like again, I think his quote unquote arc in the series is mostly backgrounded in that like it is happening, but you have to kind of read between the lines to see it happening. But I think it's really effective, and I was sad when he died.
Yeah. There's a little bit less in the show of Glenn being a cynical, snarky asshole at the beginning, and then changing. But that's fine. Can't do everything.
I will say the camaraderie we see between the four men that as they travel out to Vegas, I think this is something the show does a really wonderful job at. Like it's something that we saw a lot in the book, that the kind of back and forth insult party that was happening between Stu and Glenn at all times in the book was really great. And I think that's translated really well to screen, where we spend several scenes with these four characters as they are traveling from Boulder to the West. And we really just live with them for a bit. And, we see them joke around with each other. We see them celebrate. Like even when they get to the washed out section of the highway and what's coming, there's this really wonderful sequence where each of them go down, and then they whoop and cheer for each other as they get down there and celebrate. You did it. Yeah. And there's this real sense of, these guys like each other. They like being around each other. And I just really love how Mick Garris does that in this. I think it's so important to see that. And I really appreciate that was translated to the screen really well.
Yeah, despite it being a really the journey being a very short segment of actual screen time, I totally agree that the camaraderie is sold.
How did you feel about Stu's fall? This is one of those things that like on their budget, I just don't think they could practically do in a way that, like, all I could think about when I saw the culvert was like, no one's gonna get hurt going down that thing.
Well, that's what's silly is they almost turn it into a gag where he gets to the top and he's like, no sweat, and then he falls, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, the funniest thing to me about both his fall and when Harold goes over the embankment is they have a very loud twig snapping sound layered into the soundtrack to make you understand
so that something broke.
His leg's broken. You wouldn't know. We're not just going to show that in a second that his leg's broken. We have to have the sound, which is just a silly sound design thing, which I've never actually been around a bone breaking, so maybe bones do make a loud audible crack that you can hear from several feet away.
I've broken 2 bones in my life, and I do not remember hearing a crack either time.
Well, there you go.
So, one time I was rather drunk though, so maybe it cracked.
Maybe so. But I don't know. That was one of the but several times that the show tries to do like action, it looks kind of corny.
It does. Again, that's part of the 90s of it all, I think.
Yeah, totally.
I thought I actually looked this up because I was really curious, because we get to the crucifixion part at the end, and the things that Larry and Ralph are tied up on are like upside down horseshoes, and I was like, that's interesting. That's an interesting choice. I bet there's a story here, and actually there was. This was the TV network telling them, do not put Christian imagery into this thing. You're going to make a lot of Christians very pissed off if you show the evil guy with all these crosses everywhere, even if he's using them for crucifixion, which, by the way, crucifixion literally means tied up on a cross. Right. That's what it means. Right. So they just said fine, and they just did like horseshoe things.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. That's great.
I guess let's talk about that. We haven't actually talked about that ending sequence. How did that work for you? How did the appearance of the hand of God and that sequence, the way it played out? I mean, it was very, very close to the book for sure.
Yeah, it's close to the book. I mean, I don't know how to answer your question because on the one hand, it's yet another instance of like the special effects not really looking that great to modern eyes, and so
Mm-hmm.
you have to kind of squint past that. And then when I don't know, I think just from a directing point of view, it was a little chaotic and overly muddled, and like it didn't. So there's something wrong with the pacing to that scene to me. I guess I'm just whining about this because it is the climax of the movie. It's the
Yeah,
it's the climax of 6 hours of storytelling, and not really kind of building up the tension and pacing out the worry, and then I don't know, maybe it's just because I literally, like, we just finished reading this, and so I there's no suspense for me, but I'm like, shouldn't I feel some suspense building up towards the the finale? And shouldn't I feel something when trash arrives? I honestly, I have such a hard time knowing, because I am biased by knowing what's supposed to happen, right?
sure.
So um
I,
I
I
don't know.
do think I agree with you generally that there is something weird about the pace of it. It just seems to play out very slowly.
Yes.
And I guess, I mean, I appreciate Mick Garris's commitment to the hand of God literally appearing, and we see the electric ball that Flag creates slowly turns into the hand of God and then hits the nuke and it blows up. But I guess I still, even in my imaginings of the scene, like I still imagine something a little bit more metaphysical than just like a literal, like it's a literal hand.
Right.
I don't know. Like I think there's a way of representing that in a way that doesn't make it quite so literal. And because we have to like see the ball slowly rise into the air and see it transform into a hand and then go over and poke the nuke, and then it does kind of slow the pace of everything down to the point where you're like, this feels just a little off.
Yeah, there was a lack of urgency, there's a lack of pacing.
Mm-hmm.
Flag should be just like really losing it in this moment, and he doesn't seem any more perturbed than he has in any of the last 10 scenes we've seen him in.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I don't know, I think it was an overly complex um set piece that was maybe a bit beyond like the directorial ability to corral it into a tight propulsive bit of visual storytelling.
Yeah, and this is I guess the general question then of as we think near the end of this conversation is, we talked about Mick Garris and Stephen King himself, his kind of reverie of the source material to the point where a lot of the stated goal of this is to just recreate it as close to what it was as possible. Does that hurt it as a story? Like this is, I mean, this is the kind of the ongoing endless question of adaptation. Like, is it better to be a as literal of an adaptation of the story as possible, or is it better to take artistic liberty, but keep the meaning of the story intact? And I think this is an adaptation that overall keeps the meaning of the story intact, but is also very, very like almost to a biblical level, going to bring everything as literal out of the story as possible.
Yeah. I think that the ending sequence is one place where the adherence to the literal exact sequence of events and timings, and this, then that, then this guy said something, then that guy did something, then this happened, then that guy said this. It was I don't know, man. Like, maybe a different director could have handled that differently. Like, I don't really overall have complaints about this director, but I think in any scene where things are supposed to be fast and frantic, the the directing style is just so sort of detached and floaty that, another example is when Harold blows up the house, and Nick dies.
Mm-hmm.
There's a distinct lack of, oh no, this is important, we should be like cutting faster, or like, I don't know, man. There's like 15 different ways of cinematographically conveying that something extremely important and dangerous is happening, and that the characters are frantic. And it seems like he just kind of continued to shoot those scenes in the normal way that he'd been shooting everything else.
I agree with you with one exception. I think the Stu trying to get out of the hospital sequence is incredible.
Yeah.
And really affecting, and I think like generally terrifying. Actually, I think it's one of the scariest scenes in the movie. I mean, it's just definitely a scary scene in the book, but it's a very scary scene in the movie, and I think he shoots that with a lot of intensity and energy and movement. But so which almost makes it even more interesting that I think you're totally right about the explosion sequence in Boulder and the end of the movie, that these don't feel like they move with that kind of age. Yeah. It's so weird to me, and maybe this is just literally what happened, that like the way Trash Can just kind of like moseys up, like the crowd like slowly parts, and then like Julie says it's a bomb, and she starts running, and then like nobody else, everyone else just seems to kind of like shuffle away slowly. And part of this, this is, again, didn't have a lot of money. We have a lot of built sets. Maybe the idea of a lot of this, I think almost all of this was shot on studio. So the idea that a large group of people can just all sprint out of a soundstage quickly is just impractical. Like you can't get them out of frame quickly enough to do it in a kind of like really fast, energetic move. So you just kind of have to kind of like move the camera away from them, and in the background we just kind of see people shuffle away. I don't know. It's really interesting, yeah. But I think you're right generally.
But even I, an idiot, know that you can do the thing where you pick like a subset of them and you show them running really fast past the street light, and then you cut over and you show a different subset of them running down an alley, and so you don't have a massive stampede and trampling deaths, but you still show some people running, which is, and they don't do that, right? There's a lot of sort of obvious stuff that they don't do. And like you said, it's interesting because it's not that this is a completely artless director. I liked the Stu escaping from the hospital scene. I actually really liked all of the Mother Abigail dreams. But they had this fun like tone to them that was kind of ethereal and weird.
Fun fact about that: they flew real corn to Utah where they filmed those sequences, and it all died on the way. And so they had to spend $80,000 to construct fake corn for the cornfield.
Oh my god, that's hilarious. I mean, I'm not saying that the scenes looked good in that way. I just mean that
no, I know what you mean.
If anything, what's funny, the fact that the corn looked weird, I think added to like the ethereal weirdness of the overall scene, because it has this dreamlike weirdness to it.
Yeah, no, I get that for sure. I love those dreams too. I thought they were great. I love the one. I love the one where Larry's just shirtless in it, and like I think presumably it's just because he fell asleep without a shirt on. He doesn't sleep with the shirt on, which is a totally normal thing. But like because we start in the dream, like you're just like, how come he's not wearing a shirt?
Right. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to talk about? We didn't really talk about Trash Can Man. I liked the performance. It was fine.
Yeah.
There's not too much you can do with that. Again, that's a character who is entirely interior, as you said, right? Like the complexity of Trash Can Man is almost entirely interior. And we get to see little glimpses and pieces of it. He hears voices. He hears people. I think it is interesting that I don't think the movie ever explains why his name is Trash Can Man.
I do not believe that it does.
Which is a little funny because, like, again, to the idea of people that have not read the book watching this, are they just like, why do we call that guy Trash Can Man? I don't know why we call this guy Rat Man. He just decided to be called that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one element. The Trash Can Man is an element where I really have to wonder how that landed for other people, but that it was fine, like you say. I mean, maybe I would have written the line "My life for you" in the script like 2/3 as many times.
He says it so many times.
He says it a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those things where it's going to be really fun to compare to the 2020 version because, Matt, that version of Trash Can Man is
Different.
It's it's a choice. It's a heck of a choice.
Okay.
I don't know how successful of a. Well, we'll have that conversation.
All right, that's exciting and enticing to me.
I mean, this is just to kind of tee everything up for that conversation. This is a really interesting thing because this, as we said, this version is very, very beholden to the source material. It wants to accurately recreate it. There are small changes. There are, some small changes of necessity, some small changes of, we talked about them, stuff we don't necessarily agree with entirely, but for the most part, it reads, it looks like a visual version of The Stand. The 2020 version is not. It is much more of an adaptation in that they were attempting to, and I'll leave it up to you to determine whether they were successful or not. They were attempting to recreate this story in thematics and ideas and main ideas and stuff. And for the most part, the events play out as you would expect them to, but they make a lot of structural choices that are very different. They make a lot of character choices that are very different. They make a lot of choices. There's a lot of adaptation in this adaptation, and it's kind of cool that once you watch it and we can come back and have that conversation, we get to talk about where it was successful and where it wasn't successful, and what does that mean about what does it mean to adapt something, right? Because this is something I'm endlessly fascinated with. Is it good as an adaptation? Is it good as a story? Is it both? Which one of those matter more is a great question that I don't know the answer to.
Yeah, I think it'll be probably really weird, honestly, to watch the second consecutive Stand adaptation in 2 weeks. But I'm excited at the experience, and I have nothing against adaptations that, as you say, kind of adapt the ideas more than the story itself. And
yeah,
maybe it'll fail and just suck, and we'll see.
Except when they get those ideas wrong.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess so. I guess you're right about that.
But we'll see. Maybe you'll love it. I hope you do. I hope you absolutely love it, because you're about to have to watch 9 hours of it. So yeah, hopefully you really enjoy your time with it.
I do like enjoying things.
That is me too. All right. So unless you have anything else you wanted to say about this adaptation, Matt, I think that'll do it for us.
No, I think I'm done.
All right. So that is it. That is the Stand miniseries. No discussion question or anything this week, but I guess just in the thread for this, let us know what you thought of the 94 adaptation. Do you agree with Matt and I that it pretty much works pretty well? There are small little bits and pieces, and but let us know what you think.
Yeah. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod, and of course over on the subreddit at r/doofmedia.
One thing before we move, sorry, I just thought about the music on this. We didn't talk about the music in this adaptation, which is so fucking 90s, and that just 90s TV music where we're just gonna have random guitar riffs over here and soft rock kind of going on continually in the background. It's some great stuff, man.
It is funny, the closest thing to a soundtrack is this basically just guitar twangs of various duration. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's
good stuff. Anyway, sorry to interrupt the outro with that. If you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, it is time to do it, because season 3 is coming and it's going to be great. So make sure you subscribe. You can find us everywhere that there are podcasts. That's where we are, and you don't want to miss an episode. So subscribe right now.
That is right. And if you like our show and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks this week to new Patrons Annabeth and Marley G. Welcome. We hope you enjoy the cool stuff we have over there, including our Other Levels of the Tower bonus podcast, where once again we will be talking about Mr. Harrigan's phone this upcoming week.
I am very much looking forward to that conversation, Matt, because that is one of, I think, King's newest pieces of work that you will be seeing an adaptation to, because that is a short story that came out of his 2019 short story collection, 2020, one of those. It's a very new short story that he wrote, and so it's a very new adaptation of that short story. So we'll see next week what you think of it.
All right.
But of course, if you cannot afford to donate, that is absolutely okay. You can always help us out by sharing this podcast, especially as we move into season 3. There's maybe a lot of Stephen King loving friends that you have that aren't as into The Dark Tower, but are into some of Stephen King's other works like It and The Shining, both of which we will be covering next season. So now's the time for them to jump on board too. So share it with them, tell them to join us, and come along for the ride. It's going to be a great one. Also, you can always help us out by leaving us a rating and review on your podcasting platform of choice. This week's Spotlight review comes from 2Unstable2, who gives us 5 stars and says, "Long-time Stephen King fan." They say, "So I'm older than you know. I read The Stand as a young teenager, which then led to The Dark Tower and all of Stephen King's works. I recently discovered this podcast and just finished the Talisman pod without rereading the book, and it was so much fun. Revisiting through others' eyes and thoughts these books that made such an impact on my young adulthood is such a great experience. Both hosts are very thoughtful and intelligent in their insights. One more familiar with Stephen King's work, and one just reading Stephen King for the first time makes for a great dynamic. I never leave reviews, but they deserve it. On to Black House next." Wow, that was very kind of you. Thank you so much.
Yes, it feels particularly good to earn one of the rare first reviews. So thank you.
Yeah,
appreciate
that's a momentous occasion. We should celebrate.
Yes.
Thank you to Unstable, and thank you everyone else who has and continues to leave these rating and reviews. I see that number tick up every week, and we really do appreciate it. It means the world to us, and it of course actually does actively help us out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. As we said, we will be off next week. We're probably going to drop a bonus episode for you, but the podcast proper will be off as we frantically watch 9 hours of the 2020 Stand miniseries. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time on American Thanksgiving to chat about that one. So, you can put that on while you're eating your turkey dinner and listen to us complain about the Stand 2020.
Start a new tradition.
Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.